Claude responded. The phone rang at 11:52 on a Tuesday night, and I remember the time because I just switched off the kitchen light and stood there in the dark, listening to tea. The phone rang at 11:52 on a Tuesday night, and I remember the time because I just switched off the kitchen light and stood there in the dark, listening to the refrigerator hum the way it had every night for 40 years in that house. My hip had been barking at me since the humidity rolled in that afternoon, so I was leaning on the counter instead of already in bed. When the screen lit up with my son's name, my first thought wasn't fear. It was irritation. Marcus never called this late unless something was wrong, and I'd learned to hate that particular kind of quiet before he even said a word. I picked up, breathing, then barely audible, "Dad." Something about the way he said it made the hair rise on my arms. "I'm here," I said. "Talk to me." "I think he's outside," Marcus whispered. "I think Derek's outside my building." I didn't answer right away. 34 years, wearing a badge teaches you that silence is sometimes the kindest thing you can offer. A frightened man, it gives him room to find his own next sentence, instead of drowning in yours. Then I heard it. A car door. Gravel. Somebody testing a door handle that wasn't supposed to open. "Is your door locked?" "Yes." "Good. Stay on the phone with me." "Where are you exactly?" "My apartment. Sycamore Court, the one off Route 9. I know exactly where that is." I was already moving, grabbing my keys off the hook by the door, my old flannel jacket, the ring of keys that still had my late wife Diane's car fob on it, even though we'd sold that car years ago. I couldn't bring myself to take it off. "I'm coming to you right now. You keep that door locked and you keep talking to me." He said if I called the cops, he'd make sure I regretted it. Marcus's voice cracked on the word regretted, and something old and cold settled into my chest. The same feeling I used to get walking into a courthouse holding cell to serve a warrant on a man who thought he owned the room. "Dad, I don't know what to do." "You don't have to know." "I know." I backed my truck out of the driveway, an old green Silverado that Diane used to say I'd drive until the frame rusted through beneath me, and she was probably right. 20 minutes, son. Stay put. What if he breaks in? He won't. You don't know that. I know him, I said. Though that wasn't quite true yet, I only knew the shape of men like Derek Voss. I'd built a career around men exactly like him. The drive over felt longer than it was. Rain hadn't come yet, but the sky over the interstate had that yellow-green bruised look that meant it would. Marcus stayed on the line most of the way, and in between the silences I could hear him breathing carefully, like he was trying to make himself smaller, quieter, less findable. "Somewhere around the exit for Route 9, he said, very softly. "I should have told you sooner." "About all of it. Tell me now." "It's been going on almost a year." I gripped the wheel a little tighter and didn't say anything, because I already understood that whatever came out of my mouth next needed to be steadier than what I was actually feeling. When I pulled into the gravel lot at Sycamore Court, the rain had finally started, thin and cold. A man stood near the stairwell to the second floor, hands in the pockets of a expensive-looking jacket, the kind that costs more than it needs to, just so everyone around it understands that. He had a haircut you'd see in a bank commercial and a smile already forming before I'd even gotten out of the truck, like he'd rehearsed this exact moment in a mirror more times than he'd ever admit. "You must be the father," he said, pleasant as Sunday. I didn't answer. "I'm Derek. I don't think we've had the pleasure." "We haven't," I said. "And I don't imagine we will again." His smile flickered, just at the edges, the way a candle does right before a draft finds it. "This is a private matter between me and Marcus. I don't think it needs an audience." It stopped being private the moment you started following him. Following is a strong word. "So is trespassing?" I said. "Which is what you're doing right now." He looked at me for a long moment, recalculating, the way men like him always do when the script they memorized doesn't match the room they're standing in. Then he laughed, soft and unbothered. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I've spent 34 years finding out exactly who I'm dealing with," I said. "It's the only job I ever had." Something in his face changed, not fear, not yet, more like a man filing away a fact for later use. He took a step back, hands still in his pockets, still smiling that rehearsed smile. "This isn't over," he said, and walked to his car without hurrying, because hurrying would have meant admitting he'd lost something. I watched his taillights disappear down Route 9 before I let myself breathe. Marcus opened the door before I'd even knocked, and for one terrible second, he didn't look 31 years old. He looked about 8, the age he'd been the summer he broke his arm falling out of the oak tree in our backyard, staring up at me like I could undo what had already happened. Then he stepped forward and I caught him the way I used to catch him off that tree. "I'm sorry," he said into my shoulder. "You don't apologize to me. Not for this. Not ever." We sat at his little kitchen table until almost 2 in the morning. And that's when he told me the rest, how it started with Derek showing up at the gym where Marcus worked as a personal trainer, always so complimentary, always so interested in every detail of his day. How the compliments turned into questions. How the questions turned into, "Why does that client message you so much? And who were you really talking to on the phone last night? And I just worry about you. That's all. 'Cause I care." How somewhere in the last 4 months it had become checking Marcus's phone while he showered, showing up unannounced at his apartment, telling him his friends were jealous of what they had together, telling him his own father had always babied him, and that's why he didn't understand real partnership. "I teach people how to protect their bodies for a living," Marcus said, staring at his hands. "I didn't see this coming for myself." "You didn't miss anything," I told him. He moved the line an inch at a time. That's the whole trick. Nobody sees a mile when it's built 1 inch at a time. He looked up at me then, eyes red-rimmed. "How do you know that?" I hadn't planned on telling him that night, but sitting there in his small kitchen with the rain ticking against the window, it felt like the only honest thing left to give him. Before I retired, I spent most of my career as a federal probation and parole officer, the last 12 years running a unit that specialized in intimate partner violence cases, high-risk offenders, men exactly like Derek. The kitchen went quiet except for the rain. I know the whole pattern because I spent half my life studying it. The charm first, then the isolation, then the control disguised as concern, then the threats disguised as love. Marcus stared at me. "You never told me any of this. Your mother knew. It wasn't the kind of thing I wanted sitting at our dinner table when you were young. I wanted you to have a childhood, not a case file." "All this time," he said quietly, "and you knew exactly what this was the second I called." "I knew what it might be," I corrected gently. "Now I know for certain." His phone buzzed on the table between us. Both of us looked down at the same moment. "Unknown number. You embarrassed me tonight. That was a mistake. Both of you will understand what that costs." Marcus's hand started to shake. I took the phone from him gently and read it twice, memorizing every word the way I used to memorize threats and case files, because in my experience the exact wording mattered later more than people expected it to. "He's not going to stop," Marcus whispered. "No," I agreed. "He isn't. Which means we're not going to wait for him to decide when this ends." By morning I had a legal pad in front of me at Marcus's kitchen table. The same yellow legal pad I'd used for 30 years of case notes, because some habits don't retire just because a man does. I wrote down the time of the call, the exact wording of the threat, the make and color of Derek's car, every small detail before memory started softening its edges the way memory always does. "You're building a file," Marcus said, watching me. "I'm building a record. There's a difference. A file is something you carry around scared. A record is something you can hand to a judge." At 9, I called my old friend Ray Delgado, a detective now with the county sheriff's office, a man I'd trained 20 years ago back when he still had a nervous laugh, and now had 2 grown daughters and the tired patience of somebody who'd seen every version of human foolishness there was to see. He stood in Marcus's living room studying the threatening text on his phone. "I'm going to treat this seriously," Ray said. "I'd expect nothing less. I mean it, Walt. I'm not cutting you a break because you used to sign my evaluations. I'd be disappointed if you did." Ray turned to Marcus, and his voice softened the way it did with victims, a tone I remembered teaching him once a long time ago. "Save everything. Every message, every voicemail. Don't respond, don't delete, don't engage. If he shows up anywhere near you, you call us immediately. You understand?" Marcus nodded. "Cameras?" Ray said, glancing toward the door. "You got any?" "None," Marcus admitted. "Today's a good day to fix that." By early afternoon, my younger brother Sal showed up in his rusted-out Chevy with a toolbox, 2 folding chairs, and a bag of sandwiches from the deli he swore was the only decent one left in 3 counties. Sal moved like a man built from spare parts these days. Bad knee, bad shoulder, a hearing aid he refused to admit he needed, but he could still wire a security camera faster than most men half his age. "Heard you needed backup for old man surveillance duty," he said, setting his toolbox down. "Brought provisions." Marcus managed something close to a smile, the first one I'd seen from him in 12 hours. Our neighbor from down the hall, a retired 911 dispatcher named Carol Jimenez, came over not long after with a notebook and a thermos of coffee she never actually drank, just carried around like a badge of readiness. "Cameron needs to cover that side entrance," she told Sal, pointing. "That hedge creates a blind spot after dark." Sal looked at me. "She always this particular?" "Always," I said. "And alive because of it," Carol said without looking up from her notebook. For the rest of that day, Marcus's building turned into a small, quiet operation. Sal running wire, Carol checking camera angles on her phone, me walking the parking lot noting where headlights would sweep, where a man might stand if he believed the dark made him invisible. Marcus followed along, still in socks because he hadn't thought to grab shoes, asking the same question in different shapes each time. "You think he'll actually come back?" "I think he wants you to believe he might, every hour of every day." That's most of his power right there, the not knowing. That's not the same as an answer. "No," I admitted. "But it's the truth I've got." That evening, we ate sandwiches on folding chairs in the parking lot, and Sal told a story about dropping a car battery on his own foot back in 1991 and trying to convince his supervisor he could still finish the shift. Carol laughed so hard she had to set her coffee down. Marcus almost laughed too, for a few minutes, and for those few minutes Derek didn't own the air around any of us. Then evening deepened into night, and everybody got quiet at the same time, the way people do when they're all listening for the same sound without admitting it. The next morning, I stepped out to check the new cameras and found something small and pale sitting on the second step, glinting faintly in the early light. I bent down slowly, my knee complaining the whole way, and picked it up. A wristwatch. Marcus's grandfather's wristwatch, the one Diane had given him for his college graduation, the one he'd reported missing from his gym bag 2 weeks earlier and assumed he'd simply lost. Derek hadn't lost it, he'd taken it. And now he'd returned it exactly like this, not mailed, not handed over, but left silently on a step at 4 in the morning as a message that needed no words at all. Behind me, Marcus said, "Dad?" in a voice that told me he already understood what he was looking at before I even turned around. "He was here," I said. "Close enough to leave this, close enough that nobody heard a thing." The anatomy of a man like Derek is simple, in the end. He tests a boundary quietly first, and then he watches carefully to see who's frightened enough not to enforce it. By that afternoon, Carol had the security footage pulled up on her laptop at Marcus's kitchen table, one hand on the mouse, coffee gone cold beside her. Marcus stood behind her, arms wrapped around himself. Sal leaned in the doorway, chewing on a toothpick like it was the calmest afternoon of his life, though I knew better. "There," Carol said, freezing the frame. Grainy, dim, but clear enough. 2:19 in the morning. A figure moving low along the hedge line Carol had flagged the day before. Hood up, face angled down and away from every camera like he'd studied exactly where they were mounted. He climbed the stairs without hurrying, set something on the step, and then simply stood there, not rushing away. Just standing, facing the door, for almost 15 full seconds, like he wanted whoever eventually watched this footage to know precisely how unafraid he'd been. "That's not a man trying to win somebody back," Sal said quietly, all the humor gone out of his voice now. "No," I agreed. "That's a man applying pressure, testing how much fear he can build before he ever has to raise his voice." "You think he's done this before?" Marcus asked. "Men like Derek rarely invent themselves from nothing," I said. "Somewhere there's a pattern. We just have to go find it." I spent the next several hours doing the parts of the job nobody puts in a movie: public court records, old civil filings, address histories, anything legal and slow and dull enough that most people never bother looking. Around mid-afternoon, a name surfaced. A dismissed protective order from 6 years back, filed by a woman named Priya Anand in a county 2 hours south. Dismissed doesn't mean false. Sometimes dismissed just means somebody got too frightened to finish what they started. Marcus stared at the name on my legal pad. "You're going to call her?" "No," I said. "You're not ready for that conversation, and she may not want one either." We asked carefully, once, and we let her decide. She didn't answer the first message. She answered the second, late that evening, 4 words. "Who is this and why?" I wrote back plainly. My name was Walter Reeves. My son had recently gotten involved with a man named Derek Voss, and her name had surfaced in a public filing years earlier. I told her I wouldn't contact her again if she preferred silence, but that if she was willing to talk, it might help keep my son safe. 3 minutes passed. Then her reply. "Is he safe right now?" She wants to know if you're safe, I told Marcus. He swallowed hard and nodded, and I typed back that yes, he was with me. Diner off Route 40 tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bring someone else. I don't meet strange men alone anymore. Carol read it over my shoulder and nodded once, approving. Smart woman. The diner sat wedged between a tire shop and a place selling fireworks nobody was legally supposed to sell in that county, and it smelled like burnt coffee and old vinyl. Priya arrived 7 minutes late, a slim woman in her late 30s in a gray coat buttoned to her throat, scanning the room like she still expected danger to be seated in a corner booth somewhere. Carol lifted a hand, and Priya came over but didn't sit right away. "Which one's the son?" she asked. Marcus raised his hand slightly, and something shifted in her face when she looked at him, not pity exactly, recognition. She slid into the booth across from us and stirred sugar into coffee she never drank. "Did he already start checking your phone?" Marcus's eyes filled. He tried. She nodded like that single answer confirmed 3 other questions she hadn't even asked yet. "He's wonderful in the beginning," she said. "Makes you feel like finally somebody sees you clearly. Then he starts correcting your life. Your friends first. Then your family. Then your tone of voice, if you can believe that. He told me my father babied me," Marcus said quietly. Priya looked at me for the first time. "He always finds somebody to make into the villain of the story. Usually whoever loves you most." She told us the rest slowly, the way people tell things they've rehearsed in their own head 1,000 times but never said aloud: the gifts, the tears, the apologies, and then the isolation, and then the threats disguised as devotion. When she'd finally tried to leave, he told mutual friends she was unstable, recorded pieces of arguments out of context, posted vague things online about being victimized by someone with serious issues. "I filed for protection," she said. "Then I withdrew it." "Why?" Marcus asked, her hand tightened around the spoon. "He sent me a picture of my cat sitting on my own back porch. Then he sent me a picture of my sister walking into her own office building." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's not affection. That's a demonstration." Carol murmured something under her breath that I didn't quite catch. "You're not imagining any of it," Priya told Marcus, reaching across the table to cover his hand with hers. "That's the first thing you need to actually believe." That night, Derek's car rolled slowly past Marcus's building, headlights sweeping across the bedroom window and holding there a beat too long before moving on. I stood in the dark living room, one hand resting on the back of the couch, every old instinct in me wanting to step out onto that landing and let him see exactly who he was dealing with. But that instinct was precisely what he was hunting for: a reaction, a clip, a witness who'd only ever see the last 10 seconds and never the 90 minutes before it. So I stayed where I was. My knee ached. My hand ached around the couch frame. I hated feeling old in front of my son more than I hated almost anything else that week. But I understood his plan clearly now. He wanted people to believe I was the dangerous one, an obsessive old man who'd shown up and threatened him. He wanted me angry first, on camera, so the story could be rewritten before it was ever properly told. So instead I sat down, took 2 pills for my knee with cold coffee, and saved 1 more video file to the growing folder on my laptop. The following evening, every light on Marcus's building was switched on before the sun had even fully gone down. Not for theater. So the cameras would catch every last detail clearly. Sal carried 2 folding chairs down from his truck. "You know," he said, settling into one beside mine, "when I retired, I figured excitement meant finding a good deal on motor oil." "Life has other plans sometimes," I said. "It generally does." Carol adjusted the angle on her own camera across the lot, making no effort to hide what she was doing. If Derek wanted witnesses, he was about to get more than he'd planned for. Marcus came down carrying a tray of iced tea, steadier than the day before, but not yet entirely steady. "You don't have to sit out here with me," he told me. "I know, neither do you, if you'd rather go inside." He shook his head. "I've spent almost a year hiding indoors already." His voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. "I'm done with that part." That sentence stayed with me the rest of the night. At 7:45, Ray parked his unmarked car half a block down, close enough to respond fast, far enough that nobody could later claim he'd shown up to intimidate anyone. "You expecting company?" he asked, walking over. "I believe so." "You armed?" "My coffee's hot," I said. "That's about it." He almost smiled. "I'll take that as a no." He looked around the lot. Sal, Carol, Marcus, 3 cameras with clean lines of sight, everything visible, everything legal. "Good setup," he said. "This didn't happen overnight." "No," I agreed. "It didn't. At 8:16, headlights turned into the lot. A dark sedan, moving slow, deliberate. Marcus went rigid beside me. "Go inside if you need to," I told him. "I'm staying." The sedan idled a moment before Derek finally stepped out, in a clean jacket, phone already raised, recording. "Evening," he called out, pleasant as ever. Nobody answered him. He walked toward the stairs, still smiling, still filming everyone in view. "Look at this," he said into his phone. The father's organized himself quite the little ambush. Sal leaned toward me. "Funny thing about men who say they just want to talk." "What's that?" Everybody else usually ends up doing the listening. Derek reached the bottom step, turning his phone slowly to capture the whole scene. "I've never seen this many retirees assembled in one parking lot," he said, almost laughing. Sal raised one hand lazily. "Son, I've had knee surgery that scared me worse than you do." Even Ray, standing by his car down the row, lowered his head for a second to hide a smile. Derek's attention swung back to me. "Mr. Reeves, you've been telling people lies about me." "No," I said. "I've been collecting facts." Something flickered across his face for just a moment before the smile slid back into place. He turned toward Marcus, voice softening theatrically. "You know, this isn't who your father really is." Marcus stood up. His knees trembled slightly, but his voice didn't. "You need to leave." Derek ignored him entirely, eyes still on me. "You're making him afraid of me." "No," I said evenly. He was already afraid. I only made it visible. Derek climbed the first step. "I just want 5 minutes." "No." Another step. "I deserve the chance to explain myself." "No." A third step, his foot crossing directly onto the small landing that counted, legally, as Marcus's property. "You can't keep him from me." I stood slowly, my knee feeling the whole way up, and looked him dead in the eye. "You can walk away right now as a free man," I said. "Or you can stay right there and let every camera on this property, including the one in your own hand, record you finishing the job of ruining your own life." For the first time all evening, his confidence slipped only a flicker, but I saw it clearly. He recovered fast, laughing. "You think you've trapped me somehow?" "I don't think anything," I said. "I know what's on camera." He looked around at Sal in his folding chair, at Carol standing calm on her own porch, at Marcus steady by the door, at Ray approaching now with slow, unhurried steps. Nobody had shouted. Nobody had touched him. This wasn't an ambush. It was simply accountability arriving on schedule. "Evening," Ray said, stopping at the base of the stairs. Derek spun toward him almost with relief. "Officer, perfect timing. I've actually been recording this man threatening me for days." He reached slowly into his jacket, pulling out his phone with a flourish. "I think you should hear this." Ray held out his hand without hesitation. "I'll listen to anything you've got." Derek passed it over with total confidence, and the recording began to play across the small, quiet lot, static, a car door. Then my own voice, flatter than I remembered it sounding. "I'll handle you my own way." Then a pause, and Derek's recorded voice, smooth. "You've pushed this far enough." Another pause. "You won't enjoy what comes next." Marcus stared at me, stricken. "Dad?" Ray raised a hand without lifting his eyes from the screen. "Let's hear the whole thing before anybody says a word." The recording ended there, and for a moment the parking lot was utterly silent except for a passing car slowing briefly before continuing on. Ray finally looked up. "That's your voice, Walt?" "It is," I said. "It's also missing about 90 seconds. Derek's smile widened, delighted. "Convenient claim." Convenient thing to prove, actually. I reached into my jacket pocket and produced a small flash drive. My own building cameras record audio near the entrance. Every conversation that happens within about 20 feet of that door gets picked up automatically. His expression tightened by the smallest degree. "Anyone can edit a recording." "They can," I agreed. "Which is exactly why we're going to play the original, start to finish, right now." Carol connected the drive to her laptop, and the same conversation began to play again from the beginning. The same static, the same car door, my voice, his voice, identical at first. But this time it kept going past the point where Derek's version had conveniently ended. His recorded voice grew sharper, goading. "Go on, say something you'll regret." A pause. "Come on, old man, tell me what you're actually thinking." My own voice, calmer than I remembered feeling. "I'm thinking you need to leave this property." His laugh. "No, that's boring. Say you'll handle me." I remembered that exact exchange now, him baiting me deliberately, circling the same question until I finally answered it the way he wanted. "I'll handle you my own way," my recorded voice said, and this time it didn't stop there. "My way means cameras and reports and every legal option this state allows me." Marcus covered his mouth. Sal muttered, "There it is." The recording continued past Derek's cut point entirely. "You've pushed this far enough," my voice said again, and then the sentence he'd surgically removed because my son deserves to live without looking over his shoulder every single hour of his life. Ray looked up slowly. Nobody spoke. "Play that section again," Ray said. Right before the cut, Carol rewound and replayed it. Faint, almost buried beneath the dialogue. A radio had been playing softly somewhere behind me that night, a weather report, something about storms rolling through the valley by morning. In Derek's version, the same moment jumped abruptly to a different forecast entirely, one for clear skies the next afternoon. Ray looked at Derek. "Interesting." Derek shrugged, unbothered. "Could have been a different station." "Could have," Ray agreed. "Except a live weather broadcast doesn't skip 14 hours in half a second." Sal chuckled under his breath. "Weather ain't that fast anywhere I've lived." Nobody laughed along with him. Derek shifted his weight, and for the first time, I watched him search for a sentence that wasn't already sitting there rehearsed and ready. Just then, another car pulled into the lot. A woman climbed out, mid-40s, carrying a folder against her chest. Marcus straightened. "I know her." "That's my gym manager, Denise." She walked up without hesitation. "Sorry I'm running late, Detective." Ray nodded. "You have something for us?" She looked at Derek before answering. "Mr. Voss came by our facility 3 separate times after Marcus asked him not to. Our front desk cameras have him sitting in the parking lot for over an hour last Thursday, watching the entrance." Derek's composure cracked slightly. "I was there to return a jacket." She ignored him entirely, handing Ray a set of printed stills. Marcus stared at them, stunned. "I never even knew." "You weren't meant to," Denise said gently. "One of our trainers noticed the same car showing up too often and mentioned it to me." Another car rolled in a moment later. Priya stepped out, hesitating at the edge of the lot before walking forward. Ray glanced up, surprised. "Miss Anand." "I'd like to make a statement," she said simply. Derek actually took a step backward at the sight of her. "You remember me," she said. It wasn't a question. "I think you've confused me with someone," he tried. "I made that particular mistake exactly once," she said, and moved to stand beside Marcus rather than in front of him. "He isolated me from my own family. He recorded arguments and cut them apart afterward. Then he told everyone I was the unstable one." Ray wrote quietly in his notebook. Derek looked around the lot as though searching for one direction that hadn't already been covered by somebody holding evidence against him. His phone buzzed in his hand, and he glanced down without thinking. The live stream he'd started was still running, comments scrolling rapidly across the screen. Strangers who had just watched every second of his own fabricated recording get dismantled in real time. He ended the broadcast immediately. Far too late. Ray stepped forward. "Derek Voss." Derek's head snapped up. "Based on tonight, along with the reports already on file, I'm placing you under arrest pending charges of criminal trespass, harassment, stalking, and evidence tampering. Additional charges will depend on what the investigation turns up." "This is absurd," Derek said, his voice finally losing its polish. "This old man set the whole thing up." "No," I said quietly. "Cameras don't set anybody up. They just remember better than people do." Ray turned him around and placed the cuffs on without any resistance. Marcus began to cry, quietly, not because Derek was being arrested, but because for the first time in nearly a year, he no longer had to wonder whether anyone would ever believe him. As Ray guided him toward the patrol car, Derek looked back once, his smile returning smaller now, more desperate than confident. "This isn't finished." The car door closed. The taillights shrank down Route 9 and disappeared. 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived at my house from a law office 2 counties over. Derek intended to sue me for harassment and defamation, claiming I'd orchestrated a campaign to destroy his reputation. Marcus read it over my shoulder, his shoulders sinking. "Oh, no." I read it twice, then folded it carefully. "No," I said. "This is good news." "How is that good news?" "Because he just put every single accusation in writing, signed, and dated." 5 weeks after that, I stood outside the county courthouse holding coffee that had already gone cold in my hand. Marcus stood beside me in a blazer he usually saved for job interviews. Nervous but no longer frightened. And I understood by then that those two things aren't the same at all. Fear makes a person want to run. Nerves mean you're planning to stay. You don't have to be perfect in there, I told him. I know. I only have to tell the truth. That's all it's ever required. Derek arrived in a gray suit and fresh haircut, looking for all the world like a man who belonged behind a desk somewhere respectable. He glanced our way once, adjusted his tie, and walked inside without a word. Maybe somebody had finally convinced him that charm wasn't admissible evidence. The hearing ran nearly 3 hours, not because anyone raised their voice, but because the truth takes time when it's assembled one page at a time. Derek's attorney argued I'd waged a personal campaign against his client. Then our own attorney rose and simply opened 3 binders in sequence text messages, timestamp photographs, certified court filings. Facts rarely sound dramatic. Stacked together, they become unexpectedly heavy. Carol testified about the cameras, plain and unbothered. Ray testified about treating both men identically during the initial investigation, adding that knowing me for 20 years had only made him more careful, not less. Priya walked to the stand and described the pattern in her own steady voice. The gifts, the isolation, the edited recordings, and Derek never once looked at her. Then Marcus was called. He looked at me. I nodded, and he walked to the stand alone, needing nothing further from me. His hands shook slightly, taking the oath, but his voice found its footing within the first few sentences. He spoke about checking his phone every few minutes out of habit born from fear, about apologizing for things he'd never actually done, about losing touch with friends because explaining Derek had become too exhausting to keep doing, about sitting in his own apartment, genuinely believing he had nowhere left to go. What changed? Our attorney finally asked him. He considered it a long moment. Leaving wasn't the hardest part, he said. The hardest part was believing anyone would actually believe me. He looked toward me, then back to the judge. I'm not afraid to say the truth out loud anymore. Something loosened in my chest that I'd been carrying since that phone call at 11:52 at night. Not relief exactly. Something steadier than that. The judge returned after a short recess and delivered his ruling without anger or sympathy, simply the law laid out plainly. He found the pattern of harassment, surveillance, and manipulated evidence fully credible, strengthened by independent testimony. The protective order was granted in full, indefinite contact prohibited, and the criminal charges would proceed separately. Outside, there were no reporters, no crowd, just ordinary people walking back to their cars in the afternoon sun. Justice rarely resembles what television promises. Mostly it looks like paperwork finally catching up to the truth. It's over, Marcus said on the courthouse steps. The legal part is close to over, I told him. The rest is already done. You did that part yourself. That Saturday, Sal supervised while doing almost none of the actual labor as we repaired the porch railing at my house. I've reached the age, he announced from his lawn chair, where handing out advice burns fewer calories than lifting a hammer. Carol rolled her eyes from her side of the yard. You haven't given good advice since the Clinton administration. I distinctly recall one solid recommendation in 2003. What was it? I told Walt not to buy that god-awful recliner. Marcus laughed. He bought it anyway. And it's still hideous, Carol said. And for the first time in months, the laughter around that yard sounded completely ordinary, unforced, belonging there the way laughter used to before any of this started. That evening, once everyone had finally gone home, I carried 2 glasses of iced tea out to the porch, one for myself, and one I set quietly on the small table beside Diane's old rocking chair, the one I never could bring myself to move. The cricket started up somewhere past the fence line. The porch light glowed warm over the steps, the way it had every single evening since she'd asked me, many years ago, never to let it go dark. For a long time, I believed protecting the people I loved meant standing directly in front of whatever threatened them. Now I understand it just as often means standing quietly beside them until they're finally strong enough to stand there on their own. If you've ever had to hold yourself steady while someone you love was falling apart beside you, then you already know exactly how hard that steadiness costs. I'd be glad to hear what you might have done differently in my place. And if any part of tonight's story reminded you that patience and plain truth still count for something in this world, thank you for spending this hour of it with me. Claude responded, Real love doesn't always look like a shield thrown up in the heat of the moment. Sometimes it looks like a lawn chair, a legal pad, a porch light left burning. Real love doesn't always look like a shield thrown up in the heat of the moment. Sometimes it looks like a lawn chair, a legal pad, a porch light left burning for years out of quiet faith. When someone you love is hurting, you don't have to fix it in one dramatic night. You just have to stay close, stay steady, and let them find their own strength standing beside yours. That's enough. That's everything. A small note for you, this story was written and imagined by AI for entertainment purposes, though we hope its gentle life lesson still found its way into your heart.